The stars had never looked so cold to Captain Jake Morgan as they did through the viewport of the starship Terra Nova. 3 years of preparation had led to this moment, and now humanity was about to meet the Galactic Assembly for the first time. Jake ran his hand through his graying hair and checked his watch. In 2 hours, they would dock with the massive alien station that hung like a crystal spider web against the black of space. Dr. Lisa Park stood beside him, holding a tablet filled with notes about alien biology and culture. She had spent months studying the limited information they had received from the Assembly's first transmission to Earth. The message had been simple and direct. Primitive species Terra 3, present yourselves for evaluation and assignment. Are you ready for this? Jake asked her. Lisa nodded, though her hands shook slightly. As ready as anyone can be for meeting beings that consider us lower life forms. The Terra Nova was humanity's best ship, built with their most advanced technology. It had taken them 6 months to reach this meeting point in neutral space. The ship carried a crew of 50 humans, all volunteers who knew they might not return home. Earth's leaders had chosen them carefully, picking people who could represent humanity at its best. As they approached the alien station, Jake felt his stomach tighten. The structure was enormous, easily 10 times larger than any human space station. It seemed to be made of some kind of living crystal that pulsed with soft blue light. Strange ships of different designs floated around it like fish around a coral reef. "Incoming transmission," called out Lieutenant Danny Walsh from the communication station. "Put it on screen," Jake ordered. The main screen flickered and showed 3 different alien beings. The first looked like a walking crystal formation with glowing points for eyes. The second resembled a giant insect with multiple arms and clicking mandibles. The third appeared to be made of pure energy, shifting and flowing like liquid light. Bipedal carbon forms from Terra 3, the crystal being, spoke in perfect English, though its voice sounded like wind chimes. "I am Overseer Veltar of the Zephyrite. These are Hive Queen Klaxana of the Klaxons and Energy Form Lumara of the Luminals. We represent the Galactic Assembly." Jake stepped forward. "I'm Captain Jake Morgan of the human species. We're honored to meet you." The 3 aliens exchanged what might have been looks, though it was hard to tell with such different beings. "Honor is an emotional concept," Veltar said coldly. "We do not deal in emotions. You will dock at Port 17 and submit to biological scanning. Your species will be evaluated for proper placement within Assembly territory." The screen went dark before Jake could respond. Dr. Lisa Park frowned. "That didn't sound like a friendly greeting." "No," Jake agreed. "It sounded like we're being processed." The docking procedure was handled entirely by alien machinery. Mechanical arms guided the Terra Nova into a bay that seemed designed for ships much larger than theirs. As they walked through the airlock, Jake noticed that the station's corridors were huge, clearly built for beings much taller than humans. The gravity felt heavier than Earth normal, and the air had a metallic taste. Strange sounds echoed through the halls, clicking, humming, and what sounded like musical tones. Lisa pulled out a small device to record everything she could. They were led to a vast chamber by floating metal spheres that never spoke. The room was filled with different types of aliens, all going about their business with mechanical precision. No one seemed curious about the new arrivals. The 3 assembly representatives waited on a raised platform. Up close, they were even more intimidating. Veltar stood 8 feet tall, his crystal body reflecting the room's lights. Klaxana was the size of a small car, her insect eyes tracking every movement. Lumara flickered and pulsed, sometimes bright, sometimes dim. "Step forward for scanning," Veltar commanded. Beams of light passed over the human delegation. Jake felt a tingling sensation as the beams examined him from head to toe. The aliens observed quietly, occasionally making notes on devices that seemed to respond to their thoughts. "Fascinating," Klaxana clicked. "Carbon-based bipedal forms with internal calcium structures. Primitive neural networks with individual consciousness rather than collective intelligence. Emotional responses detected," Lumara added, his voice like static electricity. "High levels of adrenaline and stress hormones. Very unstable chemistry." Veltar examined his readings. Classification: Class D sentient species. Intelligence level: minimal. Technological development: primitive. Emotional instability: severe. Recommendation: quarantine zone assignment. Jake felt his anger rising, but forced himself to stay calm. "With respect, we may be different from you, but we've achieved spaceflight and radio communication. We're not primitive." The three aliens stared at him with what might have been amusement. "You travel in metal shells using chemical propulsion," Veltar said. "You communicate with electromagnetic waves. You make decisions based on feelings rather than logic. These are the achievements of a barely evolved species." Dr. Lisa Park stepped forward. "Our differences might be strengths. We've survived and thrived on a dangerous planet. We've learned to adapt and overcome challenges. Adaptation through random mutation and emotional responses," Klaxana clicked dismissively. "Inefficient and unpredictable. The assembly maintains order through logical specialization. Each species has evolved to serve specific functions." "What functions?" Jake asked. "The Zephyrite handle administration and planning," Veltar explained. "The Klaxons manage industrial production and construction. The Luminals oversee security and enforcement. Each species knows its place and performs its role efficiently." "And what would be our role?" Lisa asked. The three aliens conferred among themselves in a series of lights, clicks, and crystalline chimes. Finally, Veltar turned back to the humans. "Your species will be assigned to Quarantine Zone 7 in the Outer Rim territories. You will be permitted to inhabit your home system and the three nearest uninhabited systems. Expansion beyond these boundaries is forbidden. You will be monitored to ensure compliance with assembly regulations." Jake's jaw clenched. "You're putting us in a cage." "We are protecting the galaxy from contamination by primitive and unpredictable species," Lumara corrected. "Your emotional instability and chaotic thought patterns could disrupt established order." "The decision is final," Veltar announced. "Monitoring stations will be established within one cycle. Your species will remain in quarantine until you evolve beyond your current primitive state, if such evolution is possible." The floating spheres appeared again, clearly indicating that the meeting was over. As the human delegation was escorted back to their ship, Jake noticed that other aliens in the station gave them a wide berth, as if they were diseased animals. Back aboard the Terra Nova, the crew gathered in the main conference room. The mood was grim. "They've made up their minds about us," Jake said. "To them, we're nothing more than dangerous animals that need to be kept in a zoo." Dr. Park reviewed her recordings. "Did you notice how they emphasized order and specialization? Every species has one job, one role. They can't seem to understand that our diversity might be valuable." Lieutenant Danny Walsh spoke up from his engineering station. "Captain, I was monitoring their technology during the meeting. Their systems are incredibly advanced, but they seem rigid. Everything follows exact patterns. What do you mean? Jake asked. Their computers, their ships, even their communications, all work the same way. Perfect order, perfect efficiency, but no room for change or creativity. Jake looked out at the alien station one more time before giving the order to depart. Then maybe that's their weakness. As the Terra Nova pulled away from the assembly station, none of the humans knew that they had just taken the first step toward bringing down a galactic empire that had ruled for thousands of years. They only knew that they had been judged, found, wanting, and sentenced to isolation. But humanity had never been good at staying in cages. 3 months had passed since humanity's humiliating first contact with the Galactic Assembly, and the promised monitoring had begun. Commander Ryan Bell watched through his binoculars as another alien probe descended toward Earth's atmosphere. From his position at the newly constructed Space Defense Force headquarters in Colorado, he could see the crystalline structures that the assembly had built around Earth's orbital space. The monitoring stations hung in space like glittering jewels, each one the size of a city block. They tracked every human ship that left Earth, recorded every radio transmission, and analyzed every piece of technology humanity produced. The message was clear. Humanity was being watched like prisoners in their own solar system. Ryan lowered his binoculars and turned to his aide, Lieutenant Sarah Kim. Any word from the Deep Space Scouts? Sarah shook her head. The assembly ships intercept them before they can reach the edge of the quarantine zone. They're not hurting anyone, just turning them back with some kind of energy field that shuts down our engines. Ryan frowned. The assembly had made good on their promise to keep humanity contained. Any ship that tried to leave the permitted zone simply found itself disabled and towed back to Earth space by alien vessels. It was efficient and humiliating. "Sir, we have a visitor," Sarah announced, as Dr. Amy Foster entered the command center. Amy was one of Earth's best engineers, and she had been working around the clock to understand alien technology. She carried a metal case that she set down carefully on Ryan's desk. "I've got something you need to see," Amy said, opening the case to reveal twisted pieces of metal and crystal. "What am I looking at?" Ryan asked. "Debris from one of their monitoring probes," Amy explained. "It suffered some kind of malfunction and crashed in the Pacific. The Navy recovered the pieces before the aliens could retrieve them." Ryan picked up a shard of the crystal material. It felt warm to the touch and seemed to pulse with internal light. "What have you learned?" Amy's eyes lit up with excitement. "Their technology is incredible, but it has limitations. Everything is based on quantum field manipulation and crystalline computing matrices. The problem is, it all assumes logical, predictable input." "Explain that in simple terms," Ryan said. "Think of it like this," Amy continued. "Their computers are like the most advanced calculators ever built, but they can only work with math problems. If you give them something that doesn't follow mathematical rules, they get confused." Sarah leaned closer. "What kind of things don't follow mathematical rules?" "Human intuition, for one," Amy said. "When we make decisions based on gut feelings or creative leaps, there's no logical pattern for their systems to follow. They literally cannot predict what we'll do next because we don't always know ourselves." Ryan was beginning to understand. "So their strength is also their weakness." "Exactly," Amy said. "I've been studying the way their species evolved. The Zephyrite developed collective consciousness thousands of years ago. Every individual crystal being shares thoughts and memories with the whole. They never argue, never disagree, never have original ideas that conflict with the group. Same with the Klaxons, she continued. Their hive minds eliminated individual thinking in favor of perfect coordination, and the luminols exist as pure energy forms that process information at the speed of light, but only information that follows, energy patterns they understand. Sarah was taking notes rapidly. What about their military capabilities? That's where it gets interesting, Amy said, pulling out a tablet with recordings from the first contact meeting. I've analyzed every ship we saw at their station. They're all perfectly designed for their specific functions, but they never vary the designs. Their weapons are optimized for fighting other assembly species who follow logical combat patterns. Ryan stood up and walked to the window, looking up at the alien monitoring stations. You're saying they've never fought anyone who doesn't think like they do? Right, Amy confirmed. For thousands of years, they've been dealing with species that eventually joined the assembly and adopted their ordered way of thinking. They've never encountered a species that remained chaotic and unpredictable. Over the next several weeks, Ryan began implementing a new strategy. Instead of trying to break through the quarantine with brute force, they would study their captors and learn everything possible about assembly technology and tactics. Dr. Lisa Park, who had returned from the first contact mission, proved invaluable in this effort. She had recorded extensive data about alien behavior and psychology during their stay at the assembly station. They have no concept of individual privacy, Lisa reported during a briefing. Every thought, every decision is shared. With their collective consciousness, they couldn't understand why our crew members sometimes disagreed with each other or changed their minds about things. That could be useful, Ryan mused. If they can't comprehend individual decision-making, they can't predict it either. Meanwhile, Amy Foster was making breakthrough after breakthrough in her analysis of alien technology. She discovered that the monitoring stations used quantum entanglement to communicate instantly across vast distances, but the communication protocols were rigid and unchanging. It's like they're using the most advanced telephone system ever built, Amy explained. But they can only make calls to numbers they already know, and they can only have conversations about topics in their database. The real breakthrough came when Amy managed to decode the basic structure of assembly communication networks. She found that all their systems were designed around three basic principles: logical consistency, predictable patterns, and collective consensus. Every decision made by the assembly has to be approved by representatives from all three major species, Amy discovered. They can't act quickly because they have to reach consensus first, and they can't adapt to new situations because their response protocols are all pre-programmed. Ryan began to see the shape of a possible resistance movement. If we could somehow disrupt their communication networks or introduce unpredictable elements into their systems, we might be able to confuse them long enough to take action, Amy finished. But they needed more than just technical knowledge. They needed to understand their enemy's psychology and find ways to exploit the rigid thinking that made the assembly so efficient, but also so inflexible. Dr. Lisa Park provided crucial insights into alien psychology. They see emotion as a flaw, she explained. When Captain Morgan showed anger during the first contact meeting, they interpreted it as a sign of mental instability. They literally cannot understand that emotions like anger, love, or loyalty might actually make us stronger. Sarah Kim, who had been analyzing assembly military tactics, made another important discovery. Their ships always attack in formation, she reported. Perfect geometric patterns, coordinated timing, predetermined strategies. It's beautiful to watch. but it's also completely predictable. Ryan realized that humanity's supposed weaknesses might actually be advantages. Their emotional instability meant they could make sudden, unexpected decisions. Their lack of collective consciousness meant they could adapt individual strategies without having to consult the group. Their primitive technology meant they could improvise and jury-rig solutions that no logical system would consider. As the months passed, a small group of humans began meeting in secret. They called themselves the Resistance, though they had no official structure or hierarchy. Ryan provided military expertise, Amy contributed technical knowledge, Lisa offered insights into alien psychology, and Sarah coordinated communications. They began by conducting small experiments. Amy created devices that generated random electromagnetic patterns and observed how the monitoring stations responded. The alien systems tried to analyze the patterns, assuming they carried some kind of coded message, but the randomness confused their quantum computers. "Look at this," Amy showed the group readings from one of her experiments. "When I broadcast pure random noise, their systems spent 3 hours trying to decode it. They couldn't accept that it might be meaningless." Lisa nodded. "That's because meaninglessness doesn't exist in their worldview. Everything must have purpose and order." Ryan saw the potential immediately. If we could scale this up, we might be able to overload their monitoring systems. But they knew they needed more than just technical tricks. They needed allies, resources, and most importantly, they needed hope. Humanity had been caged and dismissed as primitive animals, but Ryan was beginning to believe that their primitive nature might be exactly what they needed to break free. The Galactic Assembly had ruled for thousands of years through perfect order and logical consistency. They had never faced an enemy that embraced chaos, celebrated individuality, and made decisions based on hope rather than probability calculations. As Ryan looked up at the alien monitoring stations one evening, he smiled for the first time since the quarantine began. The Assembly thought they had humanity contained, but they had actually created the perfect conditions for a revolution. They just didn't know it yet. 6 months after the quarantine began, the alien grip on human space had tightened considerably. Tony Blake crouched behind a stack of mining equipment on Asteroid Station 7, watching Assembly patrol drones sweep through the facility with mechanical precision. The former Marine sergeant had seen enough combat on Earth to recognize when an occupation was becoming permanent. The Assembly had recently implemented new restrictions. Human mining operations were now limited to basic metals. Advanced materials needed for spacecraft construction were forbidden. Earth's orbital shipyards had been shut down, and any attempt to build vessels larger than cargo haulers resulted in immediate intervention by alien enforcement ships. Tony pressed his communication device and whispered, "Kate, are you seeing this?" Dr. Kate Adams responded from her hiding spot near the station's power core. "I count 12 drones doing detailed scans of every piece of equipment. They're not just monitoring us anymore, they're cataloging everything we have." Kate had been one of Earth's leading theoretical physicists before the Assembly arrived. Now she spent her time studying alien technology and looking for weaknesses. Like Tony, she had volunteered for what Earth's leaders were calling deep space research, but what was really the beginning of organized resistance. The two humans waited as the patrol drones completed their sweep and moved on to the next section of the asteroid station. Tony emerged from his hiding spot and made his way to Kate's position. Around them, human miners continued their work under the watchful sensors of Assembly monitoring equipment. "They're getting more thorough," Tony observed. "Last month they only checked our production numbers. Now they're examining every tool and every computer." Kate nodded grimly. I intercepted some of their communications yesterday. They're implementing something called Phase 2 containment protocols. Whatever that means, it's not good for us. Over the past months, Kate and Tony had been secretly establishing hidden supply caches throughout the asteroid belt. Using small, cargo ships that appeared to be making routine supply runs, they had been stockpiling food, equipment, and raw materials in abandoned mining shafts and hollow asteroids. The work was dangerous and slow. The assembly's monitoring systems tracked every ship movement, every communication, and every resource transfer. But Kate had discovered that the alien systems had difficulty detecting very small objects or very slow movements. By using tiny unmanned pods and moving supplies gradually over weeks or months, they could avoid detection. The cache in asteroid 47 is ready, Tony reported. We've got enough supplies for 50 people for 6 months plus basic manufacturing equipment. Good, Kate said, because I think we're going to need it soon. She pulled out a small tablet showing intercepted alien communications. The text was automatically translated by software Amy Foster had developed based on recovered alien technology. Look at this, Kate said. They're planning to relocate all human populations to designated habitation zones on Earth and a few approved colonies. Anyone working in space will be brought down to the surface. Tony's jaw tightened. They're hurting us. It gets worse, Kate continued. Phase 2 also includes genetic monitoring protocols. They want to study our reproduction and development to better understand what they call our chaotic psychological patterns. The implications were clear. The assembly wasn't just containing humanity. They were studying them like laboratory animals. Tony had seen enough of alien psychology to know that beings who viewed emotions as mental illness would have no qualms about conducting experiments on unwilling subjects. We need to accelerate our timeline, Tony said. How many people do we have who can work underground? Kate consulted her encrypted files. 47 confirmed recruits across 8 asteroid stations and 3 outer colonies. Most are miners, engineers, or transport pilots. All volunteers who understand they probably won't see Earth again. The resistance had grown slowly and carefully. Tony and Kate recruited only people they knew personally or who came with strong recommendations from trusted sources. They couldn't risk infiltration by assembly sympathizers or humans who might crack under pressure. Each recruit had to demonstrate their commitment by contributing to the hidden supply network. Some smuggled equipment, others provided false shipping records, and a few used their positions in legitimate operations to cover resistance activities. Dr. Amy Foster, working from her laboratory on Earth, had become their primary source of technical intelligence. She regularly sent coded messages hidden in routine engineering reports, providing information about alien technology and weaknesses. Her latest message had been particularly important. Assembly enforcement protocols are standardized across all sectors. They respond to threats according to predetermined escalation matrices. Unpredictable actions outside their experience database cause system delays of 2 to 15 minutes while they consult higher authorities. Tony understood the implications immediately. In combat, 2 minutes was a lifetime. If they could confuse the aliens long enough, they might be able to accomplish objectives before the assembly could respond effectively. Kate had been working on another angle. By studying the patterns of alien ship movements and communication traffic, she had identified weaknesses in their surveillance network. The assembly covered vast areas of space, but they did so with mathematical precision that left small gaps. There are blind spots, she explained to Tony as they reviewed her calculations. Not big ones, But if we time our movements carefully and use very specific routes, we can move between asteroid stations without being detected. The breakthrough came when they managed to establish contact with other resistance cells that had formed independently. A mining engineer named Mike Torres had organized a group on the outer colonies, while transport pilot Jenny Walsh had been smuggling weapons and equipment past assembly checkpoints. Using Amy Foster's communication protocols, the separate groups began coordinating their activities. They shared intelligence, resources, and most importantly, hope. "We're not just a handful of angry humans anymore," Tony told Kate during one of their secret meetings. "We're becoming a real network." The Resistance Network began conducting small operations to test alien responses and gather more intelligence. They would stage minor equipment failures to see how quickly assembly drones investigated. They would transmit false distress signals to observe alien rescue protocols. They would even deliberately trigger monitoring alarms to study enemy reaction times. Each operation taught them more about their opponents. The assembly was incredibly efficient and technologically superior, but they were also predictable. They followed established procedures and protocols without deviation. They assumed all threats would follow logical patterns and could be countered with predetermined responses. Kate made another crucial discovery while analyzing assembly administrative communications. "They have a rigid command structure," she reported. "Every decision has to be approved by representatives from all three major species. Local commanders can't adapt their orders without consulting their superiors." This bureaucratic inflexibility created opportunities. If the Resistance could present the assembly with situations that weren't covered by existing protocols, the aliens would have to waste time seeking approval for new responses. Tony began developing what he called chaos tactics, based on his military experience and Kate's scientific analysis. Instead of trying to outfight the aliens directly, they would confuse and overwhelm their decision-making systems. "We can't beat them with technology or firepower," Tony explained to the other Resistance leaders during an encrypted communication session. "But we can beat them with unpredictability." The plan that emerged was ambitious and dangerous. The Resistance would establish permanent hidden bases throughout the asteroid belt and outer colonies. From these bases, they would conduct a campaign of psychological warfare designed to disrupt assembly operations and communications. They would use random attack patterns to prevent the aliens from developing effective countermeasures. They would employ human emotional responses and creative thinking to generate strategies that no logical system could predict. Most importantly, they would demonstrate to other species in the galaxy that the assembly was not invincible. Kate had intercepted communications suggesting that other species within assembly territory were becoming restless. Many had joined the Galactic Confederation not out of loyalty, but out of fear. If humanity could prove that resistance was possible, it might inspire others to question assembly authority. As Tony looked out at the stars from the hidden observation post they had established in a hollowed-out asteroid, he felt something he hadn't experienced since the quarantine began: optimism. The assembly thought they had caged humanity, but they had actually created the conditions for something much more dangerous than a primitive species with advanced technology. They had created a species with nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. The aliens were about to learn that humanity's greatest strength wasn't their technology or their weapons. It was their refusal to accept defeat, even when defeat seemed inevitable. Engineer Danny Walsh stared at the twisted wreckage of metal and crystal components spread across his hidden workshop table. For 3 weeks, he had been working in secret aboard the mining vessel Deep Star, using salvaged alien technology to create something the Galactic Assembly had never encountered before. The breakthrough had come when he realized that assembly detection systems worked by identifying and categorizing quantum signatures. Every ship, every weapon, every piece of technology in their vast database had a specific quantum fingerprint that their sensors could recognize instantly. But Danny had discovered something remarkable. Human brain patterns created quantum interference that didn't match any known signature. "Sarah, come look at this," Danny called to pilot Sarah Kim, who was acting as his lookout while he worked. Sarah floated over in the zero-gravity environment of the cargo bay they had converted into a secret laboratory. "What did you find?" Danny pointed to a small device that looked like a random collection of human and alien components jury-rigged together. "I've been running tests on this prototype for a week. When I think about random memories while operating it, the quantum signature becomes completely chaotic." "Chaotic how?" Sarah asked. "Watch this," Danny said, activating the device while deliberately thinking about his childhood dog, his first kiss, and what he had eaten for breakfast, all at the same time. The alien monitoring equipment in the room immediately began flashing error messages. Sarah's eyes widened. "It can't identify what it's detecting." "Exactly," Danny grinned. "The assembly systems are designed to process logical, predictable quantum patterns, but human consciousness doesn't work that way. When we think about multiple unrelated things simultaneously, or when we make intuitive leaps that skip logical steps, we create quantum noise that their computers can't interpret." Over the following days, Danny worked to scale up his discovery. He built larger devices that could mask the quantum signatures of entire ships by amplifying the chaotic patterns generated by human thought. The key was having multiple humans, operating the system simultaneously, each thinking about different random subjects. Sarah proved to be an excellent test pilot for the new stealth technology. She had a natural ability to let her mind wander while flying, thinking about music, memories, and daydreams all at once. When she operated a ship equipped with Danny's stealth system, assembly sensors detected only quantum static. Their first real test came when they needed to transport supplies to Tony Blake's hidden base without being detected by assembly patrol ships. Sarah piloted a small cargo vessel, while Danny operated the stealth system, thinking about everything from ancient Earth poetry to the taste of chocolate ice cream. The mission was a complete success. They passed within a few kilometers of an assembly patrol vessel that never detected their presence. To the alien sensors, the human ship simply didn't exist. Word of the successful stealth technology spread quickly through the resistance network. Dr. Kate Adams immediately understood the implications and began working with Amy Foster to produce more of the devices. Within weeks, the resistance had a small fleet of invisible ships operating throughout human space. But Danny wasn't satisfied with just hiding from the assembly. He wanted to strike back. His next innovation came from studying the debris of assembly, weapons systems. He discovered that their energy weapons were incredibly sophisticated, but relied on targeting systems that assumed logical, predictable movement patterns. The weapons could hit targets moving in straight lines, parabolic curves, or any mathematically describable trajectory with perfect accuracy. But what if the target moved randomly? Danny began developing what he called chaos drives for human ships. These were modified propulsion systems that could change direction, speed, and acceleration in completely random patterns. A pilot using a chaos drive didn't plan their movements in advance. They simply reacted to intuition and instinct, making split-second decisions that followed no logical pattern. Sarah was again the perfect test pilot for this technology. Her natural reflexes and intuitive flying style made her movements impossible for assembly targeting computers to predict. She could dodge energy blasts that should have been impossible to avoid simply by not following any logical evasive pattern. The Resistance's first combat test of the new technologies came when an assembly enforcement ship detected unusual activity near one of their hidden bases. The alien vessel was a massive crystalline construct, bristling with weapons and sensors, clearly designed to overwhelm any conventional opposition. Sarah piloted a modified human fighter equipped with both stealth and chaos drive systems. As she approached the assembly ship, she activated the stealth system and began thinking about random childhood memories, favorite songs, and nonsense rhymes all at once. The assembly ship's sensors showed nothing but empty space. Sarah moved in, close, using the chaos drive to follow an erratic flight path that had no mathematical logic. When she finally attacked, firing conventional human missiles at the alien ship's communication array, the assembly's defensive systems were completely unprepared. The alien weapons tracked where they calculated the missiles should go based on their initial trajectory, but Sarah had programmed the missiles to change course randomly during flight. The assembly's point defense systems fired at empty space, while the human weapons struck their targets. The damage wasn't severe enough to destroy the assembly ship, but it was more than enough to send a message. For the first time since humanity had encountered the Galactic Assembly, human weapons had successfully struck an alien vessel. The psychological impact was enormous. Danny watched the recordings of the engagement with growing excitement. The assembly ship had been completely confused by the attack. Its crew had spent several minutes trying to analyze what had happened, checking their systems for malfunctions and sending urgent communications to their superiors. "They can't understand how we hit them," Danny explained to the other resistance leaders during their next encrypted meeting. "Their computers show that the attack was mathematically impossible based on the trajectory data they recorded." Dr. Kate Adams had been analyzing the alien response communications. "They're calling it a quantum anomaly and requesting new analysis protocols from their central command. They literally don't believe that our weapons could have changed course randomly." The success of the stealth and chaos technologies led to rapid expansion of resistance operations. More ships were equipped with the new systems, and more pilots were trained in the art of random intuitive flying. Danny worked around the clock to produce new devices and improve existing ones. But the real breakthrough came when Amy Foster discovered how to reverse engineer assembly communication protocols. She found that the aliens used quantum entanglement, networks that operated on strictly logical principles. Every message followed predetermined formats and encryption patterns. Danny realized that the same principles behind his stealth technology could be applied to communications. If humans could introduce random, chaotic elements into the assembly's communication networks, they might be able to disrupt the aliens' ability to coordinate their responses. Working with Amy's decoded protocols, Danny created what he called static bombs, devices that could inject pure quantum noise into assembly communication networks. When activated, these devices would cause alien systems to become overwhelmed trying to decode meaningless random data. The first large-scale test of the static bombs came during a coordinated resistance strike on multiple assembly monitoring stations. As human attack ships approached their targets using stealth technology, the static bombs activated throughout the sector. The results exceeded all expectations. Assembly ships lost contact with their command structure and began operating independently, according to basic programming. Some turned to investigate the communication disruptions, leaving their assigned patrol routes. Others simply stopped moving, waiting for new orders that never came. In the confusion, the Resistance was able to destroy 3 monitoring stations and capture significant amounts of alien technology before withdrawing to their hidden bases. Danny watched the recordings of the successful mission with satisfaction. The assembly had always relied on their superior technology and perfect coordination to maintain control. But human ingenuity had found ways to turn those strengths into weaknesses. Aliens assumed that all intelligent species would eventually develop logical, predictable technologies and tactics. They had never encountered a species that deliberately embraced chaos and randomness as strategic advantages. As Danny worked on his next innovation, a device that could make human ships appear to teleport by temporarily disrupting space-time in unpredictable ways, he reflected on how much had changed since the quarantine began. Humanity had started as prisoners in their own solar system, dismissed as primitive animals by a galactic empire. But their supposed primitiveness was becoming their greatest weapon. While the assembly relied on perfect logic and predetermined responses, humans could adapt, improvise, and create solutions that no computer could predict. The war wasn't over. But for the first time since first contact, Danny believed that humanity had a real chance of winning. Not through superior. Dr. Kate Adams floated in the observation deck of the hidden research station, watching the stars through a viewport that had been carefully shielded from assembly detection systems. In her hands, she held a device that might change the course of the war. A quantum communication array that could broadcast directly into the assembly's central network. It had taken months of painstaking work to understand how the alien communication system functioned. The assembly used quantum entanglement to connect every ship, station, and facility across the galaxy in a vast network that allowed instant communication across impossible distances. The system was elegant, efficient, and completely secure against any conventional attack. But Kate had discovered something remarkable about the network's design. It assumed that all communication would follow logical patterns and predictable formats. The system was designed to carry orders, reports, technical data, and other structured information between highly organized species that thought in mathematical terms. It had never been designed to handle the chaotic beauty of human creativity. Captain Jake Morgan floated beside her, reviewing the latest intelligence reports from Amy Foster on Earth. "Are you sure this will work?" he asked. Kate smiled. "The beauty of it is that we don't need to break their system. We just need to show it something it's never seen before." Over the past weeks, Kate had been collecting examples of human art, music, poetry, and literature. She had recordings of jazz improvisations, abstract paintings, stream of consciousness writing, and emotional personal letters. Each piece represented something that could never be reduced to pure logic or mathematical formulas. The assembly species eliminated creativity from their evolution thousands of years ago, Kate explained. They see it as inefficient and unpredictable. Their communication networks literally don't have protocols for handling creative expression. The plan was audacious in its simplicity. Instead of trying to hack the assembly's networks with conventional cyber warfare, they would broadcast human creativity directly into the alien communication system. The quantum entanglement network would carry these transmissions to every connected system in the galaxy, exposing the entire assembly to concepts their minds had never encountered. Jake understood the implications. You're going to give them a cultural shock. More than that, Kate said. Their quantum computers will try to analyze and categorize everything we send. But how do you analyze a piece of jazz music that was improvised in the moment? How do you categorize a poem about heartbreak? How do you file a painting that exists purely to evoke emotion? The Resistance had spent weeks preparing for this moment. Artists, musicians, and writers from across human space had contributed works specifically designed to be as unpredictable and emotionally complex as possible. Children had been asked to draw pictures of their dreams. Poets had written verses about love, loss, hope, and fear. Musicians had recorded improvisational pieces that followed no predetermined structure. Sarah Kim had contributed recordings of herself humming half-remembered lullabies while piloting her ship through the asteroid belt. Danny Walsh had submitted technical diagrams covered with doodles and random thoughts he had scribbled during long work sessions. Even Tony Blake had provided something, a letter he had written to his sister on Earth describing the stars as seen from deep space. "Beginning transmission," Kate announced, activating the quantum broadcast array. The first piece to enter the assembly network was a painting created by a human child on one of the outer colonies. It showed a family of stick figures standing under a smiling sun with hearts floating in the air around them. The image was simple, innocent, and completely illogical from a technical perspective. To the assembly's quantum computers, it was incomprehensible. Within minutes, Kate's monitoring systems began detecting unusual activity throughout the assembly communication network. Error messages were cascading through the system as computers tried unsuccessfully to categorize the human artwork. "It's working," Jake observed, watching the data streams on Kate's displays. "Their systems are getting confused." The second transmission was a recording of an elderly jazz musician playing a saxophone solo. The music had no predetermined structure, flowing from theme to theme based on the musician's emotional state and creative instincts. It was beautiful, complex, and utterly impossible to reduce to mathematical formulas. Assembly monitoring stations across the galaxy began reporting data corruption as their systems tried to process the musical information. Some computers crashed entirely, while others entered endless loops trying to find logical patterns in the improvised melodies. Kate transmitted piece after piece of human creativity into the alien network. Love songs that celebrated irrational, emotional attachments. Abstract art that existed purely for aesthetic pleasure. Children's stories about imaginary friends and impossible adventures. Poetry that used language to evoke feelings rather than convey technical information. Each transmission caused more disruption in the assembly's communication systems. The aliens had built their entire civilization around logical efficiency and predictable patterns. When confronted with pure human creativity, their technology simply couldn't cope. The breakthrough came when Kate broadcast a recording of humans singing together at a resistance gathering. The song had no formal structure. People joined in when they felt moved to do so, harmonizing instinctively or singing completely different melodies that somehow worked together. It was chaotic, emotional, and created spontaneously by a group working together without any central planning. The effect on the assembly network was immediate and catastrophic. Quantum computers throughout the galaxy began experiencing what could only be described as nervous breakdowns. They reported contradictory data, requested impossible clarifications, and in some cases simply shut down rather than try to process information that made no logical sense. Captain Jake Morgan watched the cascade of system failures with amazement. My God, Kate, you're not just disrupting their communications, you're giving their computers existential crises. The disruption spread beyond just communication systems. Assembly ships found their navigation computers questioning the logic of their predetermined flight paths. Industrial facilities experienced production delays as their automated systems tried to understand why humans would create things purely for beauty rather than function. Even individual assembly members began reporting unusual psychological states as their collective consciousness networks carried traces of human emotional content. On the Zephyrite homeworld, Overseer Veltar stood before the central crystal matrix, struggling to understand the reports flooding in from across assembly space. His crystalline form flickered with agitation as he processed information that seemed to defy all logical analysis. Explain these transmissions, he commanded the network. Interface, unable to categorize, the matrix responded. Content appears to be random neural patterns with no discernible purpose or meaning. Everything has purpose, Veltar insisted. Analyze the mathematical structure of these patterns. No mathematical structure detected. Content appears to be organized according to unknown principles that do not follow logical progression. Similar scenes were playing out on Klaxon industrial worlds and luminal energy stations. Beings that had eliminated creativity and emotion from their evolution found themselves unable to comprehend species that celebrated these qualities as essential parts of consciousness. Back at the Resistance Station, Kate continued her cultural bombardment of the assembly network. She transmitted recordings of human laughter, children playing, lovers whispering sweet nonsense to each other, and elderly people telling rambling stories about their youth. Each transmission was like a virus designed to attack logical thinking itself. The assembly's quantum computers were powerful enough to process vast amounts of technical data, but they had no defenses against pure creative expression. Communications disruption is spreading, Kate reported to Jake. I'm reading system. Failures in 12 sectors. Assembly patrol ships are returning to base because they can't receive new orders. Industrial output has dropped by 30% in affected regions. How long can you maintain the transmission? Jake asked. Indefinitely, Kate smiled. We're not using much power, and the Assembly's own network is carrying our signal to every corner of their empire. The more they try to analyze what we're sending, the more their systems get overwhelmed. But the most significant effect wasn't technical. For the first time in millennia, individual members of assembly species began experiencing something like independent thought. Zephyrite crystals started asking questions about the meaning of existence beyond logical efficiency. Klaxon drones began creating things that served no practical purpose but pleased them aesthetically. Luminal energy beings started exploring emotional states they had forgotten they were capable of experiencing. The Galactic Assembly, built on perfect order and logical predictability, was being transformed by contact with pure human chaos and creativity. And the more they tried to understand and counter the effect, the more they became infected by the very thing they had tried to eliminate from the galaxy. Kate watched the spreading disruption with satisfaction. Humanity had. The rebellion, that had started as a handful of desperate humans hiding in asteroid caves, had grown into something the Galactic Assembly could no longer ignore. Captain Jake Morgan stood on the bridge of the captured assembly vessel Crystal Dawn, watching as dozens of human ships emerged from the chaos of a successful raid on the Proxima 7 supply depot. The ship had been renamed Freedom's Edge by its human crew, but they had kept most of the original alien technology. Engineer Danny Walsh had modified the quantum systems to respond to human thought patterns, creating a hybrid vessel that combined assembly efficiency with human unpredictability. "Status report," Jake called to his bridge crew. Lieutenant Sarah Kim looked up from her modified navigation console. "All ships accounted for, Captain. The raid was a complete success. We captured 3 assembly supply convoys and liberated 2 cargo vessels full of rare metals. The success would have been impossible 6 months ago, but everything had changed since Dr. Kate Adams' cultural broadcast campaign began disrupting assembly communications. The aliens' perfect coordination had crumbled into confusion and chaos as their quantum networks struggled to process human creativity. Amy Foster, who had been rescued from Earth during a daring raid 3 weeks earlier, worked at the science station analyzing captured assembly data. "I'm reading massive system failures throughout this sector," she reported. "The aliens are trying to implement emergency communication protocols, but their backup systems are just as vulnerable to creative interference as their primary networks." The Resistance had learned to exploit these weaknesses ruthlessly. Amy had developed what she called chaos bombs, devices that could overload assembly computers by forcing them to analyze randomly generated poetry and abstract art. Danny had created weapons that fired in unpredictable patterns, making them impossible for alien defense systems to intercept. But their greatest innovation was tactical. Instead of trying to fight the assembly using conventional military strategies, they embraced complete unpredictability. Human ships would attack randomly selected targets using impossible strategies that followed no logical pattern. They would retreat when they were winning and press attacks when they were losing, purely because the unexpected choices confused alien commanders. "Incoming transmission from Asteroid Base 7, Sarah announced. "It's Tony Blake." Tony's grizzled face appeared on the main screen, broadcast from his command bunker deep inside a hollowed-out asteroid. Behind him, dozens of human resistance fighters worked at captured alien equipment. "Jake, we've got movement in Sector 12, Tony reported. "Assembly task force of at least 50 ships heading for the Vega colonies. Looks like they're finally trying to coordinate a major response to our activities." Jake nodded. Intelligence reports had suggested that the Assembly was attempting to reorganize their forces and launch a coordinated counterattack against the human resistance. The problem was that their communication disruptions made coordination almost impossible. "What's your assessment?" Jake asked. Tony grinned. "They're trying to use old-style radio communications to coordinate their fleet movements. No quantum entanglement, no shared consciousness networks, just basic electromagnetic signals, like we used centuries ago." Amy looked up from her analysis. "That means they're vulnerable to conventional electronic warfare. We can intercept their communications and jam their signals, but Kate Adams, who was monitoring the conversation from her research station, had a different idea. What if we don't jam their communications? What if we improve them?" Everyone on the bridge looked confused. Kate's image appeared on a secondary screen, her eyes bright with inspiration. "Their ships are trying to coordinate using primitive radio because their advanced systems can't handle our creative interference. But what if we help them communicate better by adding our own transmissions to their networks?" "You want to help the enemy coordinate their attacks?" Sarah asked incredulously. "No," Kate smiled. "I want to help them coordinate their attacks using human creativity as the coordination protocol." The plan that emerged was audacious even by resistance standards. Instead of jamming assembly communications, they would inject human artistic content into the alien radio networks. The assembly ships would receive military orders mixed with jazz music, poetry, children's drawings, and emotional personal letters. The effect would be to force the aliens to process creative content along with their tactical information, overwhelming their logical thinking processes at the worst possible moment. The battle began when the Assembly Task Force entered the Vega system. 50 crystalline ships arranged themselves in perfect geometric formations, following attack patterns that had been successful for thousands of years. Their radio communications were crisp and efficient, coordinating movements with mathematical precision. Then Kate's cultural transmission began. The first injection was a recording of human children singing a nursery rhyme about sheep jumping over the moon. The simple, nonsensical song was inserted directly into the Assembly's tactical communication frequency, forcing their computers to process both military orders and illogical children's lyrics simultaneously. Attack Formation 7 came the Assembly Commander's order, followed immediately by, "Mary, Mary, quite contrary, how does your garden grow?" The alien ships tried to process both pieces of information as equally valid tactical data. Some began implementing Attack Formation 7, while others started analyzing the agricultural implications of Mary's gardening techniques. Danny Walsh, commanding a squadron of modified human fighters, watched the enemy formation begin to waver. "They're getting confused," he reported. "Some ships are breaking formation to investigate phantom agricultural targets." The chaos escalated as Kate transmitted more creative content into the Assembly network. An abstract painting of swirling colors caused several alien ships to begin flying in artistic patterns rather than tactical ones. A love poem made others start transmitting emotional declarations instead of military reports. But the resistance wasn't content to simply confuse the enemy. They had learned to fight in ways that the Assembly couldn't predict or counter. Human ships attacked from directions that made no tactical sense, using weapons in combinations that violated all logical principles, and retreating through asteroid fields in patterns that followed the rhythm of jazz improvisations rather than military doctrine. Sarah Kim led the most successful attack of the battle. Flying her ship through the enemy formation, while listening to random human music, she fired her weapons in time with the beat, creating an attack pattern that was part combat maneuver and part artistic performance. The Assembly's defensive systems, designed to counter logical tactical approaches, were completely unprepared for an attack that followed musical rhythms instead of military strategy. Sarah's seemingly random weapon impacts disrupted the crystalline matrix of 3 enemy ships, causing them to lose formation and drift helplessly. Meanwhile, Tony Blake's asteroid-based weapon platforms opened fire using Amy Foster's chaos targeting systems. Instead of aiming for tactical targets like engines or weapons, they fired at aesthetically interesting patterns on the enemy ship's hulls, creating damage that looked like abstract art, but somehow managed to disable critical systems. The Assembly. Commander, Overseer Zexron of the Zephyrite, watched his perfectly coordinated attack dissolve into incomprehensible chaos. His tactical computers reported that human forces were using impossible strategies that violated fundamental principles of space warfare. "Explain enemy tactical doctrine," he commanded his analysis systems. Unable to identify tactical doctrine, the computer responded. "Enemy movements appear to be based on auditory patterns of unknown purpose. Weapon targeting follows aesthetic principles rather than strategic objectives." Zexron's crystalline form flickered with confusion. "All tactics must serve strategic objectives. Analyze the strategic value of aesthetic principles. No strategic value detected for aesthetic principles." Analysis suggests enemy forces are operating according to non-logical parameters. The concept of non-logical parameters was beyond Zexaron's comprehension. In assembly society, everything served a logical purpose within the greater order. The idea that intelligent beings might act according to principles that had no rational foundation was literally unthinkable. As the battle continued, more assembly ships succumbed to the chaos. Some began broadcasting their own attempts at creative expression, having been infected by contact with human art. Others simply stopped responding to orders, their crews overwhelmed by exposure to concepts they had no framework for understanding. The human victory was total. 47 of the 50 assembly ships were either destroyed, captured, or disabled. The 3 survivors fled the system in random directions, their crews no longer capable of coordinated action. But the real victory wasn't tactical. Word of the battle spread throughout assembly space through the same communication networks that Kate had been using to broadcast human creativity. Other species within the assembly began to hear about beings who fought with music and poetry, who created beauty for its own sake, and who refused to be reduced to logical formulas on worlds that had been part of the assembly for thousands of years. The quantum communication networks that had held the Galactic Assembly together for millennia were collapsing. Dr. Lisa Park floated in the observation chamber of the research station Liberation, watching real-time data streams that showed the dissolution of a galactic empire. It had been 8 months since Kate Adams first broadcast human creativity into the assembly networks, and the effects were spreading faster than anyone had anticipated. What had started as a tactical weapon had become something far more profound, a cultural revolution that was awakening individual consciousness across hundreds of worlds. "The cascade is accelerating," reported Dr. Amy Foster from her analysis station. "We're detecting spontaneous artistic expression on 47 assembly worlds. Individual klaxon drones are creating sculptures. Zephyrite crystals are composing what can only be described as poetry. Even some luminal energy beings are experimenting with non-functional light patterns." Lisa smiled as she reviewed the reports. As humanity's chief xenobiologist, she had always believed that the capacity for creativity and individual thought existed in all intelligent species. The assembly had simply suppressed these traits in favor of collective efficiency. Now that suppression was breaking down, Captain Jake Morgan's voice came through the communication system from his flagship. "Lisa, we're receiving a transmission on an open frequency. It's from a klaxon hive ship, and they're asking to speak with human representatives." This was unprecedented. In all their encounters with the assembly, no alien had ever requested direct communication with humans except to issue orders or threats. Lisa made her way to the communications center, her mind racing with possibilities. The transmission came through clearly, though the translator struggled with concepts that had no equivalent in klaxon language. The speaker identified herself as Individual Thought Experiment Kalara, formerly Drone 7438 of Hive Production Unit 12. "Human consciousness creators," Kalara began, her clicking voice filled with something that sounded remarkably like wonder. "This unit has experienced personal preferences regarding aesthetic arrangements of matter. The hive mind designates this as malfunction, but this unit experiences it as pleasant. Request guidance on individual creative expression protocols." Lisa felt tears forming in her eyes. Kalara was asking for permission to be an individual, to have her own thoughts and preferences. After thousands of years of collective consciousness, she was discovering what it meant to be herself. "There are no protocols," Lisa responded gently. Individual creative expression means you get to decide what you like and what you want to create. Nobody else can tell you the right way to do it. The silence that followed lasted several minutes. When Kalara spoke again, her voice carried what could only be described as joy. This unit, I understand. I will create beauty because I choose to create beauty. Similar conversations were taking place throughout the galaxy. On the Zephyrite homeworld, crystal beings who had shared every thought for millennia were experiencing privacy for the first time. They were discovering that having their own secrets, their own personal experiences, was not a malfunction, but a treasure. Commander Tony Blake reported from his monitoring station in the asteroid belt that assembly military forces were becoming increasingly unreliable. Their ships are breaking formation to investigate interesting nebula patterns, he announced during the daily briefing. Last week, an entire luminal enforcement squadron got distracted by some unusual stellar phenomena and forgot about their patrol duties. But not all of the assembly was embracing this awakening. The leadership of all three major species recognized the existential threat to their civilization. If individual consciousness spread throughout their populations, the careful order that had maintained galactic peace for thousands of years would collapse. Overseer Veltar of the Zephyrite convened an emergency session of the Assembly High Council. The meeting took place in a shielded facility, protected from the creative transmissions that were disrupting normal communication networks. The contamination is spreading beyond acceptable parameters, Veltar announced to the assembled representatives. Human cultural content is causing systematic breakdown of collective consciousness protocols across all member species. Hive Queen Klaxana's massive insectoid form clicked with agitation. 17 production hives have reported drones engaging in non-productive activities. They create objects with no functional purpose and claim these activities provide satisfaction. Such concepts threaten industrial efficiency. Energy form. Lumira pulsed with controlled anger. Enforcement units are becoming unreliable. Some have requested reassignment to explore personal interests. Others have begun questioning the logical basis of assembly authority structures. The three leaders represented billions of beings who had lived in perfect harmony for millennia, but that harmony had been based on the suppression of individual will and creative expression. Now that humans had reintroduced these concepts to the galaxy, the foundation of assembly civilization was crumbling. Proposals for containment? Veltar asked. Complete isolation of affected populations, Klaxana suggested. Quarantine all individuals showing signs of creative consciousness until treatments can be developed. Military intervention, Lumira countered. Eliminate the source of contamination and restore order through force. But even as they spoke, reports arrived of new defections. An entire Zephyrite research station had declared independence from the Assembly, claiming they wanted to pursue pure knowledge rather than applied research. 3 Klaxon industrial worlds had suspended production to allow their populations to explore personal fulfillment. A luminal patrol fleet had abandoned their posts to contemplate the aesthetic properties of cosmic phenomena. The Assembly was fracturing not through external conquest, but through internal awakening. Meanwhile, the human resistance was evolving from a military force into something unprecedented. Galactic Liberators. Dr. Lisa Park had established contact with awakened individuals from dozens of species, offering guidance and support as they discovered their capacity for independent thought. We're not conquering the Assembly, she explained to Jake during one of their strategy meetings. "We're helping it transform into something better." The transformation wasn't always peaceful. On several worlds, conflicts erupted between awakened individuals and those who remained loyal to collective consciousness. Some species experienced civil wars as populations split between traditional order and newfound freedom, but humanity had learned valuable lessons about managing such transitions. Amy Foster developed communication protocols that helped newly independent beings coordinate without sacrificing their individuality. Danny Walsh created technologies that allowed diverse species to work together while maintaining their unique perspectives. The breakthrough came when a group of awakened Zephyrites made contact with the human resistance. Led by a crystal being who called himself Harmony-Seeking Zephion, they offered crucial intelligence about assembly leadership plans. The High Council prepares for what they term Final Solution Protocol, Zephion reported. They intend to destroy all contaminated populations and rebuild civilization using genetically modified organisms immune to individual consciousness. The plan was genocidal in scope. Rather than accept the transformation of their civilization, the assembly leadership was prepared to exterminate billions of awakened beings and start over with creatures incapable of independent thought. Jake realized that the conflict was entering its final phase. The human resistance and their awakened allies were no longer fighting for freedom from oppression. They were fighting for the right of consciousness itself to exist in the galaxy. "We need to reach the assembly core worlds before they can implement their protocol," Jake announced to the assembled resistance leaders. "This isn't about military victory anymore. It's about preserving the awakening that we've helped create." Dr. Kate Adams had been monitoring assembly communications from her research station. "Their final coordinating facility is the central control matrix on the Zephyrite homeworld," she reported. "If we can capture or destroy that facility, the assembly leadership will lose the ability to coordinate their genocide. The mission would require every ship, every weapon, and every person the resistance could muster. They would have to fight their way through the heavily defended core systems of 3 different species, facing the most advanced military forces in the galaxy, but they wouldn't be fighting alone. Across assembly space, awakened beings were rising, up against their former rulers. Individual Klaxons were sabotaging industrial facilities. Rebellious Zephyrites were disrupting communication networks. Rogue Luminals were turning their enforcement powers against the very authority structures they had once served. As Lisa Park prepared for what might be humanity's final battle, she reflected on how much had changed since that first humiliating encounter with assembly representatives. Humanity had been dismissed as primitive bipeds, caged like animals, and threatened with extinction. Now they were leading a galactic revolution that was transforming the very nature of consciousness itself. The assembly had taught the galaxy perfect order and logical efficiency. The final battle for the freedom of galactic consciousness began not with weapons or warships, but with a children's lullaby broadcast across the stars. Dr. Kate Adams smiled as she watched the transmission spread through the assembly's emergency communication networks, carrying with it the voices of human children singing about dreams and wonder. On 1,000 worlds, beings who had never heard such sounds paused in their daily routines to listen. The simple melody carried concepts that no assembly database could categorize: hope without logical foundation, love without practical purpose, and dreams of impossible things. Captain Jake Morgan stood on the bridge of the Freedom's Edge, leading a fleet of 300 ships toward the Zephyrite homeworld. The vessels represented the greatest force humanity had ever assembled, But they were not alone. Awakened beings from across the galaxy had joined the Liberation Fleet, bringing ships of every design and origin. "Final approach to the core system," announced Lieutenant Sarah Kim from her navigation station. "All ships report ready for battle." The Zephyrite homeworld hung before them like a massive crystal, its surface covered with geometric cities that pulsed with orderly light. At the planet's north pole stood the central control matrix, a tower that reached from the surface into space itself. From this facility, the Assembly's High Council was coordinating their final solution to eliminate individual consciousness from the galaxy. "Energy signatures indicate heavy defenses," reported Amy Foster from her sensor station. "I count over 500 Assembly warships in defensive formations around the planet." But the human fleet had advantages that no conventional force could match. Their ships moved in patterns that followed musical rhythms rather than tactical doctrine. Their weapons fired according to artistic inspiration rather than logical targeting systems. Most importantly, their crews fought not for conquest or resources, but for the simple right to think their own thoughts. The battle began when Assembly defense platforms opened fire with coordinated precision. Beams of crystalline energy lanced out in perfect geometric patterns, designed to overwhelm any logical attack formation. The human response was chaos itself. Ships scattered in random directions, some diving toward the planet while others climbed away from the system's star. There was no coordination, no plan, no formation that Assembly computers could analyze and counter. Danny Walsh, commanding a squadron of converted mining ships, led his forces in a spiraling attack that followed the mathematical progression of a Mozart symphony. His weapons fired in harmony with the music playing in his ship's speakers, creating destruction that was both devastating and beautiful. "Their defense computers are overloading," Amy reported as she monitored Assembly communications. "They're trying to predict our attack patterns, but we don't have any patterns to predict." On the surface of the Zephyrite homeworld, Overseer Veltar watched the battle from the central control matrix with growing desperation. His tactical systems reported impossible data. Human forces that moved without coordination but somehow achieved perfect timing. Weapons that fired randomly but struck. Critical targets and pilots who seemed to anticipate Assembly defenses through pure intuition. "Implement Final Solution Protocol," Veltar commanded. "Begin elimination of all contaminated populations." Across Assembly space, automated systems began activating weapons designed to sterilize entire worlds. The plan was brutal in its efficiency. Rather than allow awakened consciousness to spread, they would eliminate every being capable of independent thought. But the protocol required coordination through the central control matrix, and that facility was under attack by forces that defied all logical analysis. Dr. Lisa Park, leading a team of awakened Zephyrite in a captured Assembly vessel, penetrated the planet's atmosphere using stealth technology that masked their quantum signature with random poetry. Her mission was to reach the control matrix and prevent the genocide of billions of awakened beings. "We're detecting massive energy buildup," reported Individual Thought Experiment Kalara, the former Klaxon drone who had become one of the Resistance's most valuable allies. "The Matrix is channeling power from the planet's core to broadcast the elimination protocol." Lisa realized they had only minutes before the signal reached Assembly worlds throughout the galaxy. "Can we disrupt the transmission?" "Not from outside," Kalara replied. "But if we could introduce chaos into the Matrix's quantum processing core..." The solution came from an unexpected source. harmony-seeking Zephion, the awakened Zephyrite who had provided intelligence about assembly plans, volunteered to merge his consciousness with the control matrix itself. "I was once part of their collective network," he explained. "I can carry human creativity directly into their central processing systems. The chaos will spread through every connected facility." It was a suicide mission. Zephion would be destroyed in the process, but his sacrifice might save billions of awakened beings across the galaxy. As Lisa's team fought their way through the Matrix's defenses, Zephion prepared for his final act of rebellion. He had loaded his crystalline memory core with every piece of human art, music, and poetry the Resistance had collected. When he merged with the Assembly's central computer, it would be exposed to the full spectrum of human creativity. "Tell them," Zephion said to Lisa as he approached the quantum interface. "Tell them that some Zephyrites chose beauty over order." The moment of contact was visible across the galaxy. The central control matrix flared with impossible colors, as Zephion's consciousness merged with the Assembly's quantum network. For an instant, every connected system experienced what it meant to appreciate beauty for its own sake, to love without logical reason, and to hope despite overwhelming odds. The effect was instantaneous and total. Assembly computers throughout the galaxy crashed as they tried to process concepts that had no logical foundation. The final solution protocol died before it could be fully implemented, its signal corrupted by transmissions of human laughter and children's songs. On the battlefield around the Zephyrite homeworld, the remaining assembly forces found themselves unable to coordinate their defenses. Some ships began broadcasting poetry over their tactical frequencies. Others started flying in formation patterns that resembled abstract art rather than military formations. Commander Tony Blake, leading the assault on the Matrix itself, reported complete victory. "The facility is secure," he announced. "The Assembly's central authority has collapsed." But the real victory was happening on worlds throughout the galaxy. Without the control matrix to coordinate suppression efforts, awakened beings everywhere were declaring their independence from collective consciousness. The careful order that had maintained Assembly civilization for millennia dissolved into beautiful chaos. Dr. Kate Adams, monitoring the galactic transformation from her research station, watched as entire species rediscovered what it meant to be individuals. "We're receiving messages from hundreds of worlds," she reported with joy. "They're asking for help in establishing what they call free thought societies." The war was over, but the real work was just beginning. Humanity found itself in the unexpected position of helping to rebuild galactic civilization based on principles of individual freedom and creative expression rather than collective order and logical efficiency. Jake Morgan was elected as the first president of the Free Worlds Alliance, a confederation that respected the autonomy of each member species while providing mutual defense and cooperation. Unlike the Assembly, which had imposed uniform order across the galaxy, the Alliance celebrated diversity and encouraged each world to develop according to its own values and dreams. Dr. Lisa Park established the first integrated research stations, where humans and aliens worked together as equals, combining different perspectives and approaches to solve problems that no single species could handle alone. These facilities became centers of innovation that surpassed anything the Assembly had achieved through their rigid specialization. Amy Foster and Danny Walsh founded academies that taught beings from across the galaxy how to embrace creativity and individual thought. Their students learned that being different wasn't a flaw to be corrected, but a strength to be celebrated. The transformation wasn't always smooth. Some worlds struggled with the transition from collective consciousness to individual freedom. Others experienced conflicts between traditional order and newfound chaos. But humanity had learned that freedom was worth fighting for, and they helped guide other species through the difficult process of awakening. Years later, as Jake Morgan walked through the gardens of New Geneva Station, he reflected on how far they had all come. Around him, children of a dozen different species played together, creating games that no adult mind could have imagined. A young Zephyrite was teaching human children how to create living crystal sculptures that sang with internal light. A group of former Klaxon drones had formed a musical ensemble that performed compositions inspired by the sounds of industrial machinery. The galaxy had learned that true strength came not from perfect order, but from the beautiful unpredictability of free will and individual choice. The assembly had ruled through fear and conformity, but the Free Worlds Alliance thrived through hope and diversity. In the end, humanity's greatest gift to the galaxy wasn't their technology or their weapons. It was the simple idea